Welcome back to the final part of this little mini series about setting up a new site with Cloudways, and this one is a new feature to Cloudways, which is staging clone of your application. If you're not familiar with staging or the concept of staging, the idea is that you have a development environment and you have a live or a production environment of your site, and in order to test your new developments, your updates and upgrades and things that you are changing in a environment that's very like your live environment, it's highly advisable to first test your changes in a staging environment. And that's what Cloudways has quite recently allowed for WordPress applications, is to quickly create a staging version of your live site. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate here, is how to do that. It doesn't actually matter if you've got a WordPress standard installation, a WordPress multi-site installation, or a WordPress with WooCommerce application through Cloudways. The actual process is going to be the same. So we're back here at the sort of start screen, or at least the server list in Cloudways. What we actually want to get is the application. So you can either click here to change that switch, or you can click application in the menu. It's the same screen. There's our WordPress test application. This is the instance we signed up earlier as part of this series, and what we'll be doing is we'll be clicking the little three dots at the right hand side, and then you see it says clone app or create staging. We're looking to create staging, so what we'll do is we will put it on the same server and we will select create as staging. Now you can see that this is in beta, but that basically just means it's a first public version of this, but it does actually work pretty nicely, and it works pretty well. So we're going to submit that, and that is going to start creating our staging copy of the application. The next steps once this is created is to, obviously, you can get your login details much the same as the standard application, and then quite often the two steps, well actually always, the next two steps are to create the domain for your staging instance, or to point or map in the domain for your staging instance, which is, in the previous video I showed how to do that for your live application. You would do that in wherever your domain's DNS is handled. Create some A records, use something like staging.yourdomain.com or something similar to that, and point that in to the server that you're going to be using. And then you can also add SSL, which is a security certificate for your staging instance. Again, the security certificate is, if it's in place on your live site, and this is more important if you're using WooCommerce, it makes sense to replicate absolutely your live site with your staging site in order to test all of the functionality. So also, it's free. Set up a Let's Encrypt security certificate on your staging installation, and then you can make sure that everything is exactly as it is in the live instance. So you can see that the application that's finished, the staging application has been created, and there it is in my list of applications, and Cloudways has helpfully put the staging tag next to it. Now this is the one we're going to be looking at and dealing with. You can see, as with the initial application, we've actually had added the Cloudways default domain. What we get the option for with a staging site is password protection, because obviously we don't necessarily want the public to have access to this. I'm actually going to disable that for the purposes of what I'm doing next, which is to set up the domain and to set up the security certificate, and mainly that's so that I don't have to log in using the username and password just when I'm demonstrating that on this side. So here's the staging version of our site. It's exactly the same as the live version of our site. I'm going to hop on to my AWS Route 53. I'm going to create a record set for Cloudways test staging, and I'm going to point that at the IP address, and again it's an A record that I'm creating here. So wherever your DNS is managed, that's what you would create, an A record pointing at the IP address that your application is providing. Hit create. That's done. So I'm just going to see that it's in the list, and we've got, yeah, it's in there. Cloudways test. I'm going to add this domain to the staging site. I'm going to save those changes, and again it's going to take a few seconds because this actually changes some of the settings in the domain itself and in the WordPress staging installation that we've got. It's actually updating in the database. If we go back to access details, we can then see that we've added this domain. And we've got the site available. Now it's not secure because we haven't done the final part, which is to add the SSL certificate. Just make sure that's all looking right. We're going to install the certificate. Once the certificate has installed, we're going to do the same things as we did on the live site to replicate that information across. It's just going to finish installing that certificate. So you can see the certificate has installed here, and we therefore can access the site securely. We got the HTTPS and the security is working. So we have successfully created a staging site, which is there, and the staging site has HTTPS, but it doesn't apply that automatically because we've got one final step to do, which is to log into the site and change the URL. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to do this through Cloudways Database Manager so that we can see a different way of doing this. So this one doesn't have a security certificate, but it's, if you're not familiar with Cloudways, you won't recognize this at all. This is, if you like PHP MyAdmin, it's kind of similar to that with fewer options. It's a lightweight mechanism through which to access the database. At Silicon Dales, normally we're doing these things through WP CLI, which is command line interface. If you're a developer, I highly recommend you get familiar with WP CLI. It speeds up all of these processes and has a lot more options besides. But what we're going to look at is the site URL and the home URL. Now you can see they're both HTTPS, so we should be all good to access this site securely. Yes, we are. So that is that. It's as simple as that. If they were still HTTP, we would change that. but that's already updated because the live site's in HTTPS. The domain has updated when we've added the domain. You can see the blog name has updated because it's the full domain name. If that was a normal site, it would have a name, and this stuff would be relevant to the actual website. But that's the process for adding and setting up a staging site with Cloudways.